In the year 1347, Europe was alive, alive with trade, alive with ambition, alive with hope. Cities were rising from stone and sweat. Markets overflowed with spices from the east. Church bells echoed through narrow streets. Every single morning, life felt unstoppable. And then something arrived. Not with banners, not with war drums, not with marching soldiers, but quietly, silently, unseen. It travelled in the shadows of ships. It hid in the fur of rats. It slipped through crowded ports unnoticed, and by the time anyone realized, it was already too late. First came the fever, hot, sudden, relentless. Then the swelling, painful lumps beneath the skin. Then the dark stains, spreading like ink across the body. Within days, people were dead. Entire households vanished, doors left open, meals half-eaten, cradles abandoned. They would come to call it the Black Death. But this was not just a disease, it was a force, a reckoning, a shadow that would erase 1/3 of Europe. And the most terrifying part, no one knew how to stop it. The first signs did not appear in royal courts or grand cathedrals. They appeared at the docks. In October of 1347, merchant ships drifted into the port of Messina. Their sails were torn, their decks were silent. No cheers from returning sailors, no shouting from the crew, just stillness. Dock workers approached the ships cautiously. Something felt wrong. The smell reached them first. Rot, salt water, and something far worse. When they climbed aboard, they did not find cargo being unloaded. They found bodies. Some sailors were already dead. Others were barely breathing, burning with fever, whispering in delirium, dark swellings rising beneath their skin. These ships had come from distant trade routes through the Black Sea, from territories connected to Mongol Empire. For months, rumours had travelled ahead of them, whispers of a sickness in the east, entire cities collapsing, people dying within days. But rumours were easy to ignore. Trade was not. The ships were ordered to leave the harbour, but it was already too late. Rats had escaped, cargo had been handled, ropes had been tied to the docks, and with them, something invisible had stepped onto European soil. By the time the ships reached the harbour, death was already on board. Within days, dock workers began to fall ill, then their families, then their neighbours. What began at the water's edge was now moving inland quietly, patiently, and Europe had no idea what had just arrived. At first, people believed it was just another illness, a seasonal fever, something that would pass. But this was different. The fever came suddenly, hot and unrelenting. Strong men collapsed in the streets, children burned with heat through the night, and then the swellings appeared. Painful lumps beneath the skin, under the arms, along the neck. No one understood what they meant. Victims became weak within hours. Some drifted into confusion. Speaking to people who were not there, others prayed endlessly, as if the right words might stop it. Most did not survive more than a few days. Churches filled quickly. Priests moved from house to house offering last rites. But even they began to fall ill. The very men meant to bring comfort. At first, it did not seem unstoppable. It began quietly. A cough in the night, a fever that would not break. Families assumed it was exhaustion or bad food or cold autumn air. But this illness did not behave like the others. It moved quickly. One day, a person was standing in the market, laughing, bargaining, alive. The next, they could barely stand. The fever came without mercy. It drained strength from the strongest labourers, from blacksmiths, from farmers, from sailors hardened by the sea. Their bodies burned with heat, and then came the swellings, painful knots beneath the skin, appearing suddenly, growing rapidly. No one understood what they were, no one knew what they meant, but everyone knew one thing. When they appeared, death often followed. Within 2 or 3 days, many were gone, too fast for goodbyes, too fast for preparation. Homes that were full of noise in the morning fell silent by evening. The fear began to change people. Neighbours stopped knocking on doors. Mothers hesitated before touching their children. Friends crossed the street to avoid one another. Trust began to crumble. Church bells rang constantly, not for celebration, not for weddings, not for feast days, but for death. Over and over, priests worked without rest, moving from house to house, whispering prayers, holding trembling hands. But soon, even the priests began to fall ill. The men meant to bring hope were now being carried to graves. Doctors tried to fight back. They searched ancient texts. They mixed herbs and oils. They burned incense to purify the air. Some believed the sickness was carried in bad air, a poisoned wind drifting through the streets. Others blamed the alignment of the planets. If the heavens were out of balance, perhaps the earth was suffering because of it. But no medicine worked. No prayer stopped it. No charm protected against it. And so the panic deepened. Markets began to empty, merchants refused to travel, ships remained docked, trade slowed, then stopped. Workers abandoned their tools, fields were left unharvested, because survival no longer meant planning for tomorrow, it meant surviving the next sunrise. Rumours spread faster than truth. People whispered that the sickness was divine punishment, a warning from God, a reckoning for sins. People believed it was God's punishment, or poisoned air, or the end of the world. Some gathered in public squares, begging for forgiveness. Others fled cities entirely, hoping distance would save them. But wherever they went, the sickness followed. Families began making impossible choices. If one person showed signs of illness, others sometimes left them behind. Doors were shut, windows sealed, food left outside, love replaced by fear. The streets grew quieter, not peaceful, but hollow. Shops closed, footsteps faded, the laughter of children disappeared, only the sound of carts moving slowly through the roads, collecting the dead. And still, no one understood the true cause. No one saw the tiny fleas riding silently on rats. No one saw how easily the invisible enemy moved from body to body, because the most terrifying threats are the ones you cannot see. And in 1348, Europe was fighting something it did not even understand. The sickness was no longer contained to one port. It was spreading across villages, across kingdoms, across borders that meant nothing to disease. And with every passing week, hope grew weaker, fear grew stronger, and society began to bend under the weight of it all. But what would happen next would shake Europe to its core, because the plague was not finished, not even close. As the plague spread, fear began to change. It was no longer just fear of death, it became fear of each other. When people cannot see the enemy, they begin searching for someone to blame. Foreign merchants were accused, travellers were watched with suspicion, rumours spread that wells had been poisoned. that outsiders had brought a curse. There was no proof. But fear does not wait for proof. Superstitions multiplied, charms hung around necks, herbs burned in homes, symbols marked on doors. Some believed pain would save them. Groups walked through the streets in prayer, punishing themselves, hoping heaven would show mercy. But the sky remained silent. Cities began closing their gates. Guards stopped travellers, markets were restricted, communities sealed themselves off. They believed walls could stop the plague. They were wrong. The sickness was already inside, and as reason faded, society began to fracture. Because when fear becomes irrational, it destroys more than bodies. It destroys trust. And Europe was starting to break.